She wasn't dangerous. She wasn't armed. She was a mother who stole a loaf of bread so her children wouldn't starve. For that, Rome didn't offer mercy, they offered blood. She was thrown into the arena, surrounded by 50,000 cheering spectators, while half-starved leopards were released to tear her apart. People munched on figs and olives as she screamed. And she wasn't the only one. Another man was shoved into the sand with no armor, no weapon, no chance. A lion was released. His crime? Simply being born in the wrong province. This wasn't some distant tribe hiding in forests or caves. This was Rome, the most advanced civilization on Earth. The empire that engineered aqueducts stretching for miles, carved laws still studied in modern courts, and filled libraries with philosophy about virtue, discipline, and reason. The same people who wrote poetry about love and honor turned public killing into scheduled entertainment. They didn't see it as barbarism, they saw it as culture. They called the executions games. They advertised them weeks in advance. They treated them like national holidays. Wealthy families packed meals and wine. Children sat on stone benches beside their parents. Senators arrived with servants carrying fruit and cushions. Musicians, vendors, and officials were all part of the program. These were not secret crimes of a cruel few. They were planned, funded, and celebrated by the very people history calls civilized. He didn't grow up around marble columns or soldiers. He grew up in wet fields, tending animals and learning silence from the wind. His crime wasn't murder or theft or treason. It was refusing to burn incense to Jupiter. Rome called it defiance. The choice was simple: worship their gods or die for spectacle. He chose belief over breath. Livia was a slave. She'd been taken as a child, sold twice, and survived by staying quiet. Her master tried to force himself on her the night before she was arrested. She struck him with a lamp. Rome didn't ask why. It didn't consider justice. It considered ownership. A slave didn't defend themselves, they damaged property. They weren't alone. That same morning, 20 others were taken. Some were thieves who had stolen food. Not gold, not coin, just enough bread to stay alive. Others were prisoners from failed rebellions, marched from provinces whose names the crowd couldn't even pronounce. There were Christians who wouldn't recant, and a Greek teacher accused of mocking the emperor during a lesson. The night before the games, they were thrown into stone cells built under the arena. The walls sweated with cold. The spaces were too small to sit in and too tight to lie down. They were given no water, no food, just the breathing of strangers and the scratching of rats bold enough to climb over skin. Above them, in other chambers, people were already dying, from wounds, infection, or the terror of knowing morning would come. They tried to speak, but the air was so thin that every whisper felt like effort. Some prayed, others stayed silent, afraid their voices might reveal they were still alive. At dawn, guards pulled them through trap doors built into the sand. Hidden mechanisms praised in Rome as marvels of architecture. The victims didn't walk upstairs or enter from gates. They emerged from below like stage props, appearing in silence beneath the roar of the audience. Marcus surfaced into the light. He didn't understand he was in the arena until the sound hit him. 50,000 voices crashing like a physical blow. The stands were filled before he'd even opened his eyes fully. He looked around, hoping for a weapon. A stick, a stone, anything. There wasn't one. He turned to see if he could run, but the wooden gates behind him were already barred and bolted. Then came the iron gears. Across the arena, a low rumble rolled through the sand as a gate creaked open. A starved bear stumbled forward. Its ribs showed through its fur. It blinked at the light, confused, driven only by hunger and pain. The crowd cheered before it even moved. Children pointed and laughed. Mothers adjusted their hair. Men wagered on how long it would take. Vendors walked the aisles shouting prices for figs, olives, and watered wine. Nobody looked at Marcus as a person, just the first act. Livia appeared later. By then the sun had climbed high. They dressed her in a costume, a white gown, meant to match a myth the audience knew. Programs had been printed listing her role. She wasn't Livia anymore. She was Andromeda. And the sea monster written beside her name was a pack of half-starved dogs trained to attack legs and stomachs. The moment she entered, she ran. She didn't scream, there was no breath for that. The dogs didn't hesitate. Their handlers released them all at once. Music played from a raised platform. Drums and flutes kept rhythm with the chase. When she slipped in the sand, the conductor raised a hand, and the tempo quickened so the moment of her fall could be enjoyed in time. Some attendees clapped politely, the way people applaud street performers. Others turned their heads, not out of empathy, but to continue conversations about evening meals, garden parties, and chariot races happening later in the week. Between animal acts there was a crucifixion. A girl, no more than 16, was nailed to crossed beams and lifted high on a wooden post so even the farthest seats wouldn't miss the view. She prayed through blood and splinters until the crowd began repeating her words as a chant. Not in reverence, but mockery. Cups of wine were passed hand to hand as she died. Commerce never paused. Vendors sold roasted meat, cheese, and cheap drinks. Children spilled wine on the benches. The smell of sweat, blood, and cooking flesh mixed in the air. By midday, the sand had turned dark. Slaves with rakes came out, spreading fresh layers over the stains, smoothing the ground for whoever was next. The crowd barely noticed. They were too busy shouting for variety. Then came the trained fighters. Gladiators weren't heroes. They were property, criminals, enslaved men, or debtors forced to kill each other while thousands voted on who deserved to live based on how well they died. If one fell and twitched, the crowd signaled with hands and shouts. Thumbs judged fates faster than any court. Sometimes the emperor himself, Commodus, descended from his platform to participate. He wore armor plated in gold and called himself Hercules Reborn. He killed chained animals or drugged opponents, then raised his arms as though he'd conquered kingdoms. The Senate applauded because they feared not to. The games didn't always end when the sun did. Torches were lit around the arena rim, and the killing continued in the orange glow of firelight. Marcus lasted 11 minutes. They said that was long for someone unarmed. Livia survived less than 5. Their bodies were dragged through the gate of death using metal hooks. What could be salvaged, sandals, belts, bits of cloth, was stripped away. The corpses were carted to pits beyond the city walls where dogs and carrion birds finished what the arena began. The next day, replacements arrived. This wasn't rare. It wasn't shocking. It wasn't a festival. It was routine. Across the empire's arenas, thousands died every year, not for justice, but for public amusement. And Rome didn't hide it. It sold tickets. The appetite for spectacle didn't strengthen Rome. It hollowed it. Regions were emptied of people to supply the arenas. Provinces lost generations. Exotic animals were imported at enormous cost. Lions from Africa, bears from Germania, elephants from distant territories, slaughtered in minutes to satisfy crowds. Soldiers assigned to campaigns were diverted to hunt animals or capture new slaves. As the killings continued, accusations rose. With enemies scarce, citizens turned on each other. A rumor could send someone to the arena. The definition of criminal expanded until it meant available. The events designed to unify Rome instead trained citizens to see life as disposable. When Christianity reached political power under Constantine, one of the first changes was to restrict the games, not out of mercy alone, but because the empire was consuming itself. The last gladiator events were held in 435 AD. Within 50 years, the Western Roman Empire was gone. It didn't just fall to invasion. It decayed from within. People remember Rome for its law, architecture, and philosophy. But those who died in the arenas didn't see civilization. They saw a crowd that turned death into routine. Romans said it was justice, tradition, or entertainment. They said the victims earned it. They said watching it made them stronger. A society that treats death as spectacle teaches itself that life has no worth. When enough people believe that, collapse isn't sudden. It's inevitable. So the question isn't whether Rome was cruel. It's whether watching suffering today looks different or just cleaner.